there are plenty of things like that. So anyway, so happiness, obviously, what could be about? But it's interesting, you know. It's puzzling at the same time. If you look at, you know, all the great thinkers of history that have written upon happiness, what is puzzling is you could make, you know, a 2-column list with every possible definition and find the exactly opposite definition by another great thinker. So, does it mean that we really cannot define happiness? This is also a common thing. Say, oh, no, let's not attempt to define happiness. You know, everyone finds happiness in their own way. That also seems to be a little bit too easy, isn't it? But, you know, Henri Bergson, a French philosopher, said, well, all the great thinkers of history have left happiness in the vague so that everyone can redefine it in their own terms. I find it a bit not so satisfactory, because if, as Aristotle said, it's the goal of goals. Every goal is to achieve something in order to feel a sense of fulfillment, eudaimonia, accomplishment, flourishing. And if you don't know what it is, you know, it's like shooting arrows in the dark. You might hit the target, you don't even know why. And then you start speaking like, you know, Parisian intellectuals that are so much against happiness. But they, yeah, when I wrote this, my little book, you could not believe the debate. It was a national debate. And my sort of opponents, they wrote a tribune in one of the main French weekly saying, the dirty works of happiness. You know, stop bugging us with telling us we must be happy, you know, imposing on us the duty of being happy. How terrible. How you dare. We are unhappy and glad to be so. That makes a meaningful, romantic life. So, but still, they still say, even those who can't care a damn for happiness, you know, there's those magic moments in life, and that's what we need to do, and the rest can be boring, it's nice, you see the contrast and all that. But you know, yes, okay, magic moments. And you know, there's some very trivial magic moments, you know, all those magazines, they say, what makes you happy? And someone said, eating a plate of spaghetti, you know, okay, forget about those. But some people say, walking on the snow under the stars. Well, that sounds quite good. But why a magic moment? There may be reasons for that. You might think, why did I feel so good? A kind of peace. And maybe it's a sense of what? In that moment, there was less inner conflicts. Possibly I feel at peace with myself, whether I'm alone with some good friends walking under the stars on the snow. Maybe a sense of harmony with others. Certainly harmony with nature. So, a moment of inner peace that has surely some characteristics. No conflict. My mind was not flooded with aggressivity, resentment, ruminations. If it was, you would feel even more miserable. You would say, not about a magic moment, you would say, here I was in this beautiful place and I felt so bad. So, clearly, it was about a state of mind, of harmony and so forth. So those have meaning. And why not cultivating that? Why should it be just fleeting moments and then get bored the rest of the time? So cultivating also, they hate that, the French intellectual. They said they are against the endless cultivation of oneself. They side with Emily Bronte, who when she heard about cultivating happiness from her doctor, she said, oh, you cultivate that like potatoes? So she didn't feel very much that it could be cultivated as a skill. So then it seems that if Aristotle and the Buddhist thinkers, like so as the Dalai Lama, who says, no matter what, you don't wake up in the morning thinking, may I suffer the whole day, and if possible, my whole life. Whatever you do, when he says happiness is the goal of life, what it means? Because the same French intellectuals say there's so many more things that are more important than happiness. Justice, and passions and creativity. Well, that's the way they find their happiness, isn't it? So it's like, in a piece of Molière, there's Monsieur Jourdain, who was so proud when he was taking lessons of literature that he was doing some prose. He didn't know he could write prose. He was not aware that he was writing prose, so he felt that what he was writing was so much more noble, if you call it poetry or prose. So likewise, you are seeking happiness in certain ways, but that's still the goal of goals is that kind of sense of fulfillment. Whether you take a cup of tea, whether you meet some friends, whether you undertake a project, a human relationship, you do it because you hope that at the end of the tunnel there will be something better, some kind of at least less suffering. Even the French intellectuals who write books against happiness, they don't do that to make everyone, including themselves, suffer more. They think we have to set things straight, it's some kind of improvement. So in a way, yes, we want this kind of increased well-being. So therefore, if that's the goal of goals, flourishing, accomplishment, then it would be nice to have at least some idea of what it could be and what certainly it is not. So there are many confusion about it. Looks alike, false friends. One of the clearest examples is pleasure and happiness. Nothing wrong with pleasure, but it's just not the same. And if you look at the characteristic of a pleasurable experience, it's something that is very much linked with outer conditions. It can change with places, with people, with time, and it is vulnerable to sudden change of circumstances. Something very pleasant becomes unpleasant. It also changes as you experience it. You can take many examples. Listening to a beautiful piece of music, how ecstatic, but 24 hours, imagine, non-stop. Or you go under the snow, in the snow, under the stars, very cold, and then you come and take a hot shower. How blissful. 24 hours under the hot shower. Incredible Belgium chocolate, 1 piece, 2 pieces, satiated. 25 pieces. Forget it. So it changes. It becomes something else. And also it could be experienced at the cost of others' well-being. You could feel great pleasure and everybody is suffering terribly, or even you could use others in a negative way. So there's no basic relation with sense of a way of being. So now if you think of happiness not as this endless succession of pleasurable experiences, which are kind of a recipe for exhaustion. All these guys jumping, I'm so happy, and then they collapse. So, a way of being, what does that mean? Something that doesn't really depend. Instead of depending on the fleeting, changing conditions, it gives you the resources to deal with the ups and downs of life. The more you experience it, instead of vanishing away, the more it becomes deep, stable, understood. So it's a kind of aspect of cultivation, reinforcing, deepening, becoming clearer, more stable. And it's also something that somehow can be shared in a way. The French philosopher Alain said the best gift you can do to others is to be happy yourself, because somehow there will be this emotional contagion, this empathic resonance. Someone smiles, you smile. Someone feels like terrible. You do feel something about that. So it's a way of being. And ways of beings can be learned. Ways of beings is not just one thing. There's no such thing as happiness. There's no happiness center in the brain. There is a cluster of qualities or components that together contribute to that way of being. So then how you will recognize those? Basically through direct experience. If you make a seminar, as many people do sometimes, okay, let's come for a weekend, we are going to cultivate jealousy for 2 days, full days. A seminar meditating on jealousy. We promise you that we'll be feel more jealous at the end of the 2 days. Who is going to come? we know instinctively that even we say that passion makes a colorful life, that you don't want to be more jealous, have more animosity, more resentment, more arrogance, more craving, and all that. Okay, now if we say, let's cultivate loving kindness, let's cultivate inner strength, inner peace, some kind of freedom from those chain of thoughts that sort of whirlpool in your mind, those ruminations, hopes and fears that leaves you not a moment of peace. Say, wow, that sounds sort of neat. So we know intuitively that. Some people will argue that that makes a colorful life. You don't want to get rid of those. It will be so boring. Some people have this idea of happiness is that kind of bland state. Oh, well, no, not the small minds. Like Goethe wrote, 3 days of uninterrupted happiness will be unbearable. It's always the same. And another French writer said, suffering is so colorful. It's always changing. Ups and downs and this dramatic course of events. So they're more exciting. But frankly, if you are in one of those magic moments, looking at a beautiful landscape from a mountainside or somewhere, are you missing the feeling of being in an emergency room, in a hospital or something like that? Not really quite. So if there was a way somehow to be less vulnerable to bouts of nagging jealousy, craving that is like drinking salty water, the more you experience it, the more you crave, or resentment that doesn't leave you in peace, I think we sort of go for it. So the question is, so in a way, if we are honest with ourselves, it is kind of desirable. So the idea that we should accept ourselves the way we are, well, that's great as a starting point, but not as an end point. Because that's it. That's how I am, take it or leave it. Recognize the way we are, that's necessary. Have this lucidity about where we are in life. We are this mixture of light and shadows. That's the way we are. But okay, is it optimal? Could we do something a little bit better? Is it possible? So the desirability, I think, is if we're honest with ourselves, there are aspects of our life and our experience that could be improved. But is it possible? That's the real question. So before going deeper into that, I just want to make a quick side trip on the idea of outer and inner condition, because all I've been talking is more like the way we experience things. And many people will say, well, after all, your well-being is mostly determined by outer conditions. So I think there's no contest, there's no argument that the more we can improve the outer condition, the better. And especially in parts of the world where still they are lacking so much. We should put every bits of energy we have to remedy to the gap between the rich and the poor, to people, provide them with security, with freedom from conflict, from wars, from massacres, so that they can feed their kids and survive and so forth, and ideally live a healthy, long life and fulfill your aspirations within freedom. Yes, of course. But to just say that this will, in itself, guarantee a sense of really deep sense of fulfillment, that every moment of your life you feel it's worth living and is experiencing with that quality. That's also missing something. That something is the fact that from morning till evening, it is the mind that experiences all that. And the mind can really transform those into either happiness or misery. It can in fact override the outer conditions. We can feel miserable in condition that looks like a little paradise, that thing, oh, I have everything to be happy. And we can feel, on the other hand, we know people, we might have experienced ourselves, feeling quite filled with joie de vivre and basic sense of inner strength, even when nobody would say, oh, that's the best condition you can imagine. And that has to do with the way we sort of translate the outer condition in either happiness or misery. And that's, it's quite easy to see how we can perceive the very same situation in a different light. I like one example that I was a witness of when I was traveling with one of the young abbot of my monastery, and we were somehow invited to Tahiti. It's not very much, there's not so many Buddhist monks going there, so they were quite excited. There was a piece on the evening news, 2 main items. They found a red snake. There's no snake normally in Tahiti. I don't know where it came from. And then 2 Buddhist monks came. So next morning, we are in a beautiful place. It looks terribly nice on postcard, but it's quite hot and wet there. So it was a house where Paul Gauguin used to live, and we were sitting under a tree, and it was pretty hot. And then suddenly from that tree came a kind of very sort of refreshing mist, like one of those things that you go like psht, and the Lama said, "Wow, this is really paradise. Even the trees are air conditioned." But so we were really enjoying that. Then someone came. He said, those are pissing flies. Thousands of them. Nothing really bad, just the sap of the trees, it's kind of very, it's a biofood. But still, we really moved away. You don't want to take risk, So, same thing, same sensation, no difference. The mind made it flip over completely. So, okay, that's just to make sure that we don't underestimate the power the mind has. And it could be up to some, quite strong extremes. The Dalai Lama gave one example. He said, if you move for the first time, you just bought a very expensive, luxurious flat on the top of a skyscraper, and you move in for the first time, and you are so depressed and sad and destroyed within. He said, all you are going to look for is a window from which to jump. So in that very, strong shortcut, it just shows that in the end, it is the mind that experiences everything. So it is desirable to improve the way the mind experiences the world. But the real question is it possible to change something? So that has to do with some kind of investigation about how does the mind works. So of course there are a lot of emotions, passions, reasoning, memories, past events, tendencies, predispositions influence the way we experience things. Or there could be many other factors, genetics, epigenetics, neuroplasticity, the environment, nature and nurture, and all this. But at some point, we have a mind with a particular mental landscape. In that landscape, we find all kinds of emotions, states of mind. Some are destructive, again, craving, hatred, and so forth. Some are contributing to flourishing. We can say that's human nature in all its richness and variety. But what does that mean, it's human nature? Again, the Dalai Lama gives often the example of water. H2O is just pure water. Now, you can add into that some medicinal substance, the water becomes therapeutic. You can add a strong poison, cyanide, and then this is my last word. But H2O didn't really change. The content changed, the mixture changed. But you can still distillate the water or I don't know, filter it or purify it. But water itself didn't change. Would that apply to the mind as well? So just give a quick another image. The mind has a kind of luminous faculty. Luminous in the sense that it allows us to perceive the outer world. It allows us to perceive our inner world. Again, memories, emotions, and so forth. So it is like the light that allows us to see things. So that luminous quality, if you think of that image, light, what is the quality of light? It illuminates things, but it's not modified by what it illuminates. If it shines upon a heap of garbage, it doesn't become dirty. If it shines upon a heap of gold, it doesn't become expensive, it just reveals things. So there is a component deep within the mind, sort of the most fundamental aspect of cognition, just knowing, that allows to know all. Positive emotion, negative emotion, memories, anticipation of the future, and so forth. Every cognitive process is preceded by this quality of knowing. And maybe, like the light, it has to be undetermined, not tainted by the content. Otherwise, if light was modified by the lighting upon a heap of garbage, everything will seem dirty when you light everything else. If hatred was so intrinsic to the very, very core of fundamental awareness, then somehow hatred would color everything. But it cannot color everything, and also love will color everything. Those are mutually incompatible. So it seems that mental events, mental constructs, which happen in the mind for many causes and conditions, are transient, but the very fact of knowing is the fundamental aspect. So if that fundamental aspect remains sort of untainted by the content, then you could think of modifying the very condition that brought about craving, animosity, and so forth. There, you can start thinking of new causes and conditions that you can bring in that will serve as antidote, or that will serve as to, work with negative emotions so that they don't overwhelm you, so that you maintain a kind of freedom, and so that you don't lose track of that more fundamental aspect of mind. So that's the foundation, at least in the Buddhist approach. But I think this has a universal value because we all have the same emotions, we all have the same minds, and if we find something that seems to make sense, either it's true for all or false for all. There's no such thing that a certain kind of way of dealing with emotion will be true for the Buddhist and useless for others. So there is a whole science of dealing with those mental factors. How do we deal with hatred? And what kind of skillful means you use to not to fall under the sway of hatred or craving and so forth. So there could be, the richness of the method is what makes a part of transformation. In the case of Buddhism, said the Buddhist part is meant about dealing with the mind, transforming the mind. When we say purifying the mind, it's not just like we purify something that is intrinsically dirty, but it's more like removing the cyanide from the water and recovering the true state of the water when it's not contaminated by cyanide. So that means gradually getting rid of those mental toxins. So how would you do? You could have many methods. Just to mention quickly two of them, you could have a direct antidote. So two things that are mutually incompatible. You cannot have feeling hate and benevolence in the same moment towards the same person. Those are mutually incompatible. Maybe you could alternate, but not in the same moment. Which means the more you try to bring up benevolence, loving kindness, then at every instant of loving kindness, there's no possibility for this hatred going to the same object. So the idea of repeatedly enhancing, cultivating, bringing up certain way of, certain states of mind which are conducive to happiness, again and again, voluntarily, with a certain way of cultivating those, is going to modify your mental landscape. There could be also other ways. For instance, when we are overwhelmed with anxiety, with whatever, jealousy, it's all over the place. We almost feel that our whole being is permeated with that negative feeling. But is it really true? The mind, it seems, always have the faculty to observe that, to be aware of that, isn't it? Usually it's all over the place, but the mind doesn't need a second mind and a third mind to observe itself. It has the faculty to naturally observe itself, like a flame or a light doesn't need a second light to light itself. It's self-luminous. So the mind can observe itself. So now, if you think about it, what is aware of anger, what is aware of anxiety, is not anxious, it's not angry, it's just aware. So you have a space of awareness, you have a space of mindfulness, and that can grow slowly so that the other ones start to fade away. It loses solidity, it loses compelling power to make you feel miserable. So all those are different techniques which we find very much developed in detail and taught by meditation teachers on how to deal with those automatic chains of thoughts that often invade us. So therefore, there are means to do so. So now, of course, you might say, well, that's good, but, are you really, does it really have an effect? Does it change you? Or just daydreaming? You get those people, just meditating, and when someone comes and says, just leave me alone, I'm meditating to become a better person. And then you heard someone, with 10 years of meditation and is just as grumpy as before. So something wrong. But if first, in your own experience, you feel that, yes, you don't have the same sort of propensity to blow the fuse at any moment. You can find yourself in very nice circumstances. Okay, fine, great, enjoy it. And then next day, quite annoying. It's okay, no big deal. It's not the end of the world. You still remain content and with a sense of humor and a bit amused by the big mess around. So you're not swayed so easily by change of circumstances. So this kind of thing, slowly you can see that change. And if by chance others see, this guy a little bit more, so, easy to go with than before, that's a good sign. But I think in our modern world, often we need more than that, because you might think they're all fooling themselves. And it's easy to meditate in the hermitage, but wait a moment, we'll put them in Wall Street and see how they behave after 6 months. So that's why, in a way, it was a useful thing for society to begin that collaboration with science, as Richard mentioned, with the Mind and Life Institute. It was founded 25 years ago by Francisco Varela, a wonderful Chilean-born neuroscientist who realized that he was himself a Buddhist practitioner. He went to visit many great masters in the Himalayas. He realized that he understood that the Dalai Lama had a very strong interest in science. He often said, if I had not been Dalai Lama, maybe I would have been electrical engineer or something, whatever. So fortunately, I think he's a Dalai Lama. Well, it's a bit more rare in our planet. So they thought, well, and someone else, Adam Engel, an American businessman, that they could facilitate meetings with the Dalai Lama and scientists. So there was all kinds of scientists, and still now, quantum physicists and so forth. He had great teachers, like Friedrich von Weizsäcker, and he met with many of the Karl Popper and all that. But then more recently, it became more focused on psychology and neuroscience. And I remember Francisco Varela, when I was myself engaged in a dialogue with a wonderful astronomer, Trinh Huan Tuan, and he says, even though we had a very interesting exchange of ideas, but he told me, you are wasting your time. I said, how come? Because we're exploring the nature of reality, things are independent, anyway. He said, why? He said, well, you are not going to go to the accelerator of the CERN in Geneva and tell them, I went in my meditation and I think you should run the particles that way and you will find the Higgs boson or something like that. But if you go to neuroscience, definitely there's a research program that could emerge. By collaborating with scientists, there's something that could really be precious. So that whole movement started under the expression of the Dalai Lama. He encouraged very much, he said, what contribution can we make to society? And then that research program was started because of that. And then what that meant is the idea that Francisco Varela himself before he passed away, and then chiefly Richard Davidson in Madison, Antoine Lutz, a French researcher who is there, and many more, like Tanya Singer at the Max Planck in Leipzig. We thought that, well, if there is some real change that science can investigate, it should be all the more visible in long-term meditators. Not to say that they are especially good or enlightened, but at least they try for a long time. And so let's see if we can get them, some of them, in the lab. And so, yes, we did manage to convince, because they are also kind of curious minds, to convince meditators who had done between 10,000 to 50,000 hours of meditation to come first to Madison and then to a few other institutions like Princeton, Harvard, Berkeley, and now also in Europe. And then, because the idea was if we have something to be found, then they should show that. And if they show, great, then we can study, how do they reach to that, what is the process. But if we don't find anything, either those are complete fakes, or the equipment we have is not, say, refined enough to see those changes. Is it the real thing? Or I remember once we were walking in New York with one of my lamas and a few monks. There was this guy sitting in the street, and he looked at us, he says, "Are you the real thing or the bunch of crooks?" he said. So that's what we need to put the meditators to the test. Is it real? Does it any change? So then that's happened, and then right away, the scientists found that yes, there was really significant changes in functional aspect of the brain. When the meditators, as I show you, were asked to engage in certain meditation, there was huge changes happening that you would not find with naive subjects. Then the second part, we say, okay, if that is the case, how long does that take? What is the learning curve? You just no progress for 10 years and suddenly you get it. Or you progress everything within 6 months and then you are wasting your time, you just make no progress. Or is it just a curve as many years as you practice, which seems to be the case, you keep on progressing. So that was very exciting. So I volunteered as a guinea pig. I didn't know that I was end up doing more than 150 years in MRI machine. And my dear mother is very worried. She said, "Yeah, I'm going to put you again in the oven," or something like that.